Chapter 31. Ashalia remained alone in the cabin for the entire journey, quietly refusing to partake of conversation or meals with her companions. Though a heavy choice now awaited her, she found peace in neither Raithwal's sword nor Garun's, but instead only in the time-worn blade that Azelas had entrusted to her. She took it from its sheath and traced the lettering with her delicate fingers, and all at once the stress melted into temporary oblivion, and she could remember vividly the days when her parents lived, when she and Rassler would wreak havoc on the palace, when Azelas would pretend to scold her before the rest of the cortege, then congratulate her on a job well done in private. This made the trek easier, though she knew that she could not escape her responsibilities, and she slept until they neared land, at which point the hum of the engine slowing gently woke her. Oddly, she realized then for the first time that when the war ended, for better or for worse, she would dearly miss the straw. By dusk they reached Balfonheim, where they found the greater population, the sea pirates, it seemed, in a chaotic state of panic, and Redas in his office barking orders at his assistants.
"Don't just stand there, lads! All ships in the water!"
"All?"
"Yes, all. Send fishing dories if need be. And leave what boats have foundered. I want souls saved, not driftwood."
"Aye, sir." As the last of the pirates scrambled out of sight, Redas took notice of Ashalia and her cortege lingering in the doorway and explained himself with an exhausted sigh.
"Our armada ran afoul of bad water near the Ritorana cataract. All engines stopped a sudden, trouble with a thick mist, it seems."
Fran folded her arms.
"Your luck would be reversed if you would entrust it to Nethysite-powered airships."
Bolthier and Vaughn couldn't help but smirk, and Redas regarded her with a slightly jealous admiration.
"Reversed and multiplied if I had entrusted it to a Vieira,"
he replied, getting a smile out of Fran.
"But what matter?"
he went on.
"Magicite engines are as good to us now as sky to a fish. Tell me what happened in Giruvagan. By the lay of your eyes, I measure all did not go well."
"You can say that again," Vaughn groaned.
"Sid, was he false, as I feared?"
"Yes," said Ash.
"But we may have caught a glimpse of his true intent." "Let me guess, something pertaining to a tower on a distant shore."
Ash's eyes turned suspicious.
"How did you know?" "Ha! So quick to action, you can't help but expect to miss out on the details. Tell me first your source, and if I think it should help, then I shall reveal mine."
"Just like old times," Bolthier mumbled.
"We met a creature of some kind,"
Ash explained with an irritated sigh.
"It called itself Garun, and said it represented a race called the Aquaria. It told us of the origins of Nethysite, a stone called the Suncrest. King Raithwal cut the shards from it to bring peace to Ivalice in his time, and the Aquaria have asked that I now do the same."
"Peace through Nethysite?" Redas scoffed, leaning against his desk.
"Through the most powerful source of violence we know."
Ash clenched her teeth and turned her eyes to the floor.
"We are skeptical as well," said Bosch. "They say peace can only be achieved if both empires are conquered and their royal houses wiped out. They want her to kill Monty."
Penelo clarified.
"It's more than just that," said Vaughn. "They said if Ash becomes the ruler of Ivalice, there won't be any more war. We'll all get along." "By force, I'm sure,"
Redas corrected.
"Don't you realize what this means? The de-affected Nethysite was only a fragment. Its power was only a fraction of a far greater whole. And these Aquaria, I know nothing of them, and care to know even less. Surely such strength is not meant to be controlled by mortals.
Fran placed a hand on her hip and spoke sullenly.
We are inclined to agree, but we can see no other way. We think the Sun Crest is the source of all Nethysite's power. If we might break it with Rythwal's sword, no new stone may be born, and the Dusk Shard would be spent after one use, powerless for many lifetimes. As for the manufactured Nethysite, who can say? There is another way,
Balthier added.
We use Garon's sword to cut a new stone from the crest, use that to fight the Dusk Shard and the manufactured stones, then just stop short of world domination and use Rythwal's sword to send the Sun Crest back to hell where it belongs.
Redas rested his chin in his hand, smoothing his beard thoughtfully.
All this talk of fighting. Already the Nethysite influences your minds. Nonsense,
Ash growled.
Whichever route we take, it will end with the destruction of all Nethysite. Will it, now? You favor the second choice, then, is that it? Destroy the Empire, then destroy the Nethysite? What madness leads you to think you will truly follow such a path? Do you deliberately mock me or can you just not help it? A little of both, I suppose.
Vaughn stepped in before the bickering could escalate.
Either way, we have to find the Sun Crest first. Tower on a distant shore, remember. Now there I can help you,
Redas replied.
I saw something similar at Draklar, the Naldoan Sea, the Ridorana Cataract, and the Pharos Lighthouse. I sent my fleet to fish out the truth behind these words, and caught nothing but trouble. Then you think this lighthouse on the Naldoan Sea is our tower on a distant shore?
Asked Bosch, placing a hand on Ashalia's shoulder to calm her.
I,
replied Redas,
but mind you, I have thought wrong in the past. But this time you've got Sid's backing,
Balthier commented dismally.
The mist that becalmed your ships is a grimmer, yet clearer sign than any we might hope for,
Bosch added with a nod.
Whether the Sun Crest is there or not, it is surely a reliable starting point. Then we will set out immediately,
Ash replied.
Not so fast,
said Redas.
The sun has already fallen. If you are to go in search of such power, you must do so with a clear head.
Ash glowered at him once more, but rather than match it, he gave her a conceding smirk and continued, Stay your glares, Highness, I beg you. I meant no offense. On the contrary, I insist you stay here for the night. I can offer you far better room and board than Balthier can, I assure you. Ash cast a sideward glance to Balthier, who nodded his approval, and then stonily returned her gaze to Redas.
If you insist.
Despite her instinctive assumptions given his occupation and demeanor, Redas proved a most pleasant host, having clearly been bred of Arcadian aristocracy and well aware of the honor provided in entertaining royalty. Ash found his prim etiquette almost as charmingly misplaced as Balthier's, though he appeared to be of a rougher generation, taken to letting his manners thin on occasion and unafraid to withhold the proprieties awarded to women by Arcadian chivalry. He spoke of his good intentions as he led them through the mansion, claiming no interest in payment or any of the usual cares of pirates, but instead in earning Balfonheim its proper dues, as it had been paying Vane handsomely for its sovereignty, and his reputation had begun to suffer as a consequence. Ash felt inclined to believe this, though she still did not approve of her recent dependence on the cooperation of criminals, a sentiment, of course, that she dared not verbalize.
For your Highness,
Redas declared, opening the door to a lavishly furnished room on the top floor.
The finest bed in all of Balfonheim. And the others?
She asked.
Downstairs.
She nodded her approval and granted him a minute smile.
Thank you, Retas. Bosch will stay with me. I will.
Asked Bosch. She looped her arm around his and pulled him in, bidding the others a short good night and closing the door behind her.
Whoa!
Said Penelo.
I had no idea. It's nothing,
Balthier growled.
Royal trust is not easily gained,
Retas sighed.
Don't get too down on yourself,
Vaughn assured him, gesturing after Bosch.
Seems like just yesterday she was slapping him silly.
Retas showed the others to their room as well, and Balthier gave the kids proper warning that if he woke to find them anywhere near him, he'd be throwing them off the dock before they had a chance to fight back. They proceeded to mock him for this, bringing back into light the few hours he spent carrying Monty up Mount Boromyces, but he resigned to simply ignore them, too tired and disgruntled to put up a decent protest. Sensing his discontentment, Fran presently returned to the foyer with the intention of stepping out for some fresh air. Indeed, the indoor dwellings of the humans proved far too cramped for her taste, and found Retas doing the same. She explained the circumstances that had led to their involvement in the princess's quest, as well as Balthier's increasingly serious attitude toward it, but Retas assured her that all would right itself in the end, and that the only variables were when and how the end would come about. She accepted this with a sigh, but then, after a brief pause, she slowly continued.
I do not believe I ever properly thanked you for taking him in. No thanks is necessary,
Retas replied.
The adjustment was difficult enough for me. I couldn't let him go through the same.
Her ears flicked at this, and she stared intently at her feet.
He is getting better, I think, but he does not behave as the other humans sometimes. He still feels guilt. He's a good man, he just doesn't know it yet.
She shook her head slightly.
Such short lives, and you waste so much time. You may have all the time in the world and cherish none of it,
said Retas.
All it takes is one moment of greatness to compensate for a wasted lifetime. I can only hope,
she replied. For a moment she felt not too different from the Aquaria, struggling tirelessly to save the pathetic little humans from themselves, but she had seen over the years that the stubbornness that plagued the race very often had a hand in their finer accomplishments. For all their immaturity, for all their selfishness, for all their ignorance, the humans had a way of working together that had kept them the rulers of Ivalice for uncountable ages. But Balthier would only just begin to realize this as he was awakened in the dim hours of the morning. Timid hands shook his shoulder, and he followed his first instinct, to roll over and ignore it, only to hear a slight murmur in its place.
Balthier! Balthier, wake up!
His eyes opened groggily, focusing with intrigue on the figure before him, mussed hair, a rumpled silk slip, a blanket clutched protectively around her shaking body. Ash. Unfortunately, he wasn't yet of a mind to voice his observations, and instead mumbled a half-conscious, "Hey." "Shh," she hushed him urgently, glancing at the others sprawled out on the floor around them. Though excitement was evident in her voice, her eyes glistened with desperation.
I need you. Whoa, whoa, whoa,
he choked.
I don't fly that way. Quiet. Come with me.
He cast a disparaging glance at the clock across the room, barely able to locate it in the shadows.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning, woman. Where's Raslor? What? My ring. Where did you put it? You're going to?
He looked at her curiously then, and seeing her intent to be no mere whim, he rolled to his feet.
No way am I missing this.
They stood out on the dock for almost an hour. She paced, and whispered, and chewed her fingers. He watched, arms folded, telling her to calm down. At one point, she stood at the very end of the dock, barefoot and shivering, holding the ring out over the water and biting her lip uncertainly, and he noticed for the first time how thin she was, and how beautiful, and how childish. Her feet turned slightly inward, toes curling over each other, and there was a feral, psychotic glint in her eye that could have easily turned to tears had he criticized her for her failure. When she let her arm drop back down to her side, ring still clutched in her hand, he simply stood, picking up her blanket from the planks where it had fallen, and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders.
You look like you need some caffeine,
he said, and she released a short, bitter laugh, almost a gasp. They sat across from each other on the floor, then, in Retta's office, Balthier insisted he wouldn't mind, and drank their coffee in almost total silence. The sun gently set its rays through the window, illuminating patterns on the floor, somehow bringing her to her senses. She uncrossed her legs and tucked them under her. She pulled the blanket around tighter. Princesses did not allow themselves to be seen so disheveled.
I'm going to be queen,
she said at length.
Isn't that a good thing?
He asked in reply.
Queens do not consort with pirates. So.
She released a sigh, staring down into her empty mug.
I want to free Dalmasca. I truly do. But I want things to stay as they are. I want you and Fran flying the Strahl, and Vaughn and Penelo making as much trouble as they can, and Bosch taking care of me no matter how I try to discourage him. I want this to last forever. You want to run away? I suppose I do. It doesn't solve anything,
he said, shaking his head slightly.
Really, it just postpones things.
Seeing that her eyes fell to the floor despairingly, he shifted uncomfortably and spoke again.
Listen, princess. The only thing worse than living in the past is living in the future. You should be queen, but that doesn't mean you will be. Vayne could very well crush the resistance and take all of Ivalice for himself. You could just as easily end up working for Retta's, or for me, if you get your ass in gear. Or we could all die before lunch.
A smile played faintly upon her lips, and he continued with an almost inaudible sigh.
History is built by our own hands. That's his favorite line. Now, if my crazy old man won't stand by and watch the Aquarius stones shape our world, you shouldn't either. You're going to end this. You're going to do all sorts of great things, and go down in history as the dynast queen you were born to be. And every so often, I'll drop by and kidnap you, just to keep things interesting.
She continued to stare downwards, a pathetic attempt to hide her embarrassment, and he rose before her, extending a hand. Taking it, she let him pull her up, but quickly released him in order to wrap the blanket more securely about her bony frame. He noticed her fumble and alleviated the quandary by taking her mug and setting it aside with his, airily letting loose a comment about her royal appearance, and receiving an equally biting response. She met his eyes for only a moment, noting that they held the same coppery shade as the wood of Retta's desk in the morning sunlight, and suddenly she realized that he, too, looked quite rugged from the early awakening. His vest was gone, his hair not quite as perfect as usual, his shirt buttoned only halfway up. For a moment, he almost looked Dalmascan. Taking note of her steady gaze, he cocked his head and raised an inquisitive eyebrow.
"Enjoying the view?"
All she could do to keep from smiling was bite her lip, which in his opinion was 10 times better, anyway. She silently held the ring out to him in her open palm, and he seemed to hesitate for some fraction of a moment in taking it back. He reached out, but then paused briefly and laid his hand on hers, flattening the ring between them, gingerly gripping her fingers and turning them, and he kissed her hand, very carefully, half expecting a punch in the gut. It didn't come, however, and he slowly released her, sliding the ring into his own hand as he did so. She stared at him, breathless, and with his other hand he tucked a wayward lock of hair behind her ear, then told her to go back to bed. Bosch would have a heart attack if he awoke to find her missing. She obeyed, but found sleep impossible with fresh caffeine in her veins and Bolthir on her mind. The sun flickered through the drapes, lighting the dust that puffed in the air, mesmerizing her as she laid clammy and still on her back, tenderly rubbing her knuckles, hoping to find some trace of the kiss. Eventually, she rolled out of bed and scooted toward Bosch. He insisted on sleeping on the floor, and nestled herself against his side, hugging his arm. He stirred, but did not wake, quietly whispering a name she did not recognize, his wife's, she guessed, which did little to settle the flutter in her heart. Though after an hour or so he jolted back, shocked to find her so close, apologizing even as she rose and readied herself for the journey. The others had woken already, and she wondered if Bolthir had even slept after seeing her off, if he had lain awake and thought about her, if he could even remember what he thought, if he was at all like she was. He and Franz stood by the window discussing some story of the good old days with Retta's, while Vaughn and Penello giddily inspected a map on the wall, noting all the places they had been and all the places they were determined to go. They leapt with joy at her arrival, ordering Bosch to wake her up sooner next time, and Retta's gave her a respectful nod of apology, then said that he would accompany Her Highness, if she did not object. In such a mood, she couldn't.